would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work, the Gundungurra land and people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which you, our listeners, are joining us from today. I recognise the deep connection that First Nations people have to this land, their enduring culture, and their commitment to the preservation and care for their country. This land was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Hey there, and welcome to Beyond the Surface, the podcast where we explore the stories of people who have survived religious trauma, left high control or cult communities, and are deconstructing their faith. I'm your host, Sam, and each week I'll talk with individuals who have taken the brave step to start shifting their beliefs that might have once controlled and defined their lives. Join us as we dig into their experiences, the challenges they've faced, and the insights they've gained. Whether you're on a similar journey or you're just curious about these powerful stories, you're in the right place. This is Beyond the Surface. Welcome, Josie. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I am excited about this. If people don't know you, you are one of our wonderful advisory committee members for the collective. And so I already know that this is going to be a wealth of information and insight for people listening to this episode.
Oh, I hope so.
But for some context, I mean, people are already probably guessing if you're on our committee, you are in Australia. But for some context, where in the world are you at the moment?
Well, I'm on Gadigal land, which is Sydney.
Lovely.
And more precisely, I'm on the east coast, well, the eastern beaches part of Sydney, Coogee, which
extra beautiful.
Which is extra beautiful, and that's an Indigenous word meaning stinking seaweed. So there we
beautiful.
go. And there is a lot of stinking seaweed. So yes, so that's where I'm.
Beautiful. I love to start these episodes with a super vague question to kickstart the conversation. So, where does your story start?
That is super vague.
Yeah.
Could be my real story started when I left the church, couldn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, like that's kind of when I, started to wake up. But, for the purposes of your podcast, my story, let's say, in the church started at age 10 when I was converted. And I didn't leave the church till I was 45. So that's a long time.
It is, yes.
And a lot of people are very surprised by that, but there are plenty of people who go, they get it.
What are they surprised about?
That it's so long.
Oh, right.
Yeah, but I think most people listening to this will know just how long it takes to figure a whole lot of stuff out. And my exit was many years coming, probably 20 years.
Yeah, right.
So, when you actually finally stop attending church, a lot of the work is done.
Yeah. Yeah, there is definitely a process of like physically in, mentally out, and all of that sort of process where it takes time. Yeah.
Well, and then there's the physically out and sort of mentally out, and then there's all that spiritual residue.
Yes.
For maybe 5 years when you wonder what you actually do believe and whether there is some bits that you still kind of believe, like a belief in the Almighty or was Jesus sort of somebody worth knowing or somebody special, or so there is a lot of that.
Yeah.
And then now I'm 20 years later, so I've got a whole different set of beliefs. So where does my story start? Plenty of kind of entry points to that.
Yes, and I actually just I mentioned to you before we started recording that I'm reading your book at the moment, and I just read the chapter where you had talked about your conversion. And so I'm curious, for people listening, what flavor of Christianity were you converted to, and what on earth drew you to it at that age?
I was, what flavor? I was converted to the Anglican Church, the
Right.
Anglican Church of Sydney, Sydney Anglican, which is very different from other
Yikes.
cities. Yikes. But you know, it was a long time ago, and it didn't really kind of grab me by the neck until I was at university.
Yeah.
So, my book is about my rather awkward and difficult and sometimes traumatic family background
Yeah.
and my great affection for my elder sister, who used to go off to Christian camps. And
Yes.
she went off on so many Christian camps and used to have the time of her life and would come back regaling us all with the adventures she had. So for me, it seemed like exactly the place I wanted to
Yeah.
be.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been away from home for longer than one night, I think. So you go off to these camps for 7 days
Yeah.
and everybody's making a fuss of you. And I think it was love bombing before
Mm.
we had the term love bombing. It was,
Yep.
you know, 70s.
Mm-hmm.
The counsellors, as they were called, weren't very old, maybe 17. I know that because I became one myself when I was 17.
Yeah.
You had enormous responsibilities, these counsellors. You'd have maybe 10 children of age 10 that you would look after for a week. You'd
Mm.
sleep in the same room with them. You would do everything with them.
Yeah.
So you developed a very strong bond with them, as I did with my counsellor. I still remember her name, her camp name, her real name.
Yeah.
That week was so profound. The difference between me and my sister is that she just fell in love with the women on the camp
Yeah.
without realizing, of course, at that time why she was falling in love with all the women until she was
Yeah.
much older. But I fell in love with Jesus.
Mm.
And she was horrified, as was my family.
Yes. Yeah. I'm because I also was someone who did not come from a Christian family. I
Yep.
joined at the very developmentally ripe old age of 13.
Yes.
And so what was it like for you navigating that sort of my family thinks I'm batshit crazy believing this stuff,
Yes.
but
Yes.
it feels really real to you at the time.
It felt so real. And I remember the counselor out the front, and her camp name was Zip.
Oh.
And she was talking about, you know, Jesus was knocking on the door of your heart. And
Mm.
there was all these pictures of, remember,
Yep.
behold, I stand at the door and knock. I remember very well. And she said, you just have to open the door. And I
Yeah.
thought, I've just got to do it
Yeah.
because that's God. I'd never heard words like this before.
Yeah.
And of course, now we realize that evangelical and conversion strategy is to get you when you're young.
Yeah.
So they got me. First come to Jesus moment, one of many. Down
Yeah.
the front, I went, got my scripture union notes. Do we still do scripture union? Yes.
Yeah.
Got my
Oh.
scripture union notes, was told to read the Bible every day, came home and told my family that none of them were Christian, they were all going to
Mm.
hell. So there was plenty of that going on, to my mother's profound indignation, because
Yeah.
she was kind of, you know, nominal Anglican, and my father was Jewish, converted to Anglican,
Mm.
and they thought this was ridiculous. But, you know, I was in a complicated family, and I didn't feel as though I understood
Mm.
what my place was in the family, who I was in life. I'd had a difficult year in year five.
Mm.
Didn't seem to be doing very well. I seemed to be getting into trouble a lot.
Yeah.
And the teacher was always crying when she spoke to me. I wouldn't have thought a
Oh.
10-year-old had that much power. Oh, about my bad behavior. She was crying, do you hate me? That one of those teachers. So
Oh my
there's
God.
things, yeah. So I went on this camp and thought, I'm all right now. I'm
Yeah.
all right. And I did a lot better for a few years. And I, you know, joined Sunday school, and I found Christian friends when I was in year 12. You know,
Mm.
it steadily became part of my DNA, as it does, just
Yeah.
infiltrated the bone and marrow till I was really fully immersed.
Yeah.
I was always very conscientious. So when I did something, I just did it so properly.
Yeah. Go hard or go home.
Go hard or go home. And I just went so hard. And read
Yeah.
my Bible every day. The self-discipline was incredible. I
Yeah.
suppose that's one good thing. I did learn self-discipline,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is sort of drifting off now.
That's all right. It can. It served its
Okay, it
purpose.
can ebb and flow. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I think, and I talk quite a lot about this because one of the pivotal things in my story was that I did year 13 with the Sydney Anglicans at YouthWorks. And so I know a little bit about the Sydney Anglicans and just how conservative and fundamental they are.
So
So
what were you doing? A gap year or
yeah,
something?
I was doing the gospel gap year.
Oh, the gospel gap year. Well, of course,
Yeah.
I went to Camp Howard that became Anglican
Oh,
Youth Department, that
yeah.
became YouthWorks. So I
Right.
was just an early incarnation.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
So
you did a gospel gap
yeah.
year. Oh man.
Yeah, it was like it was a pivotal moment in my downfall as well. But
Yeah,
I'm asking this question because I talk about how conservative and fundamental the Sydney
yeah,
Anglicans are, particularly in comparison to perhaps some other Anglican
yes,
groups. Is that the style of um, indoctrination you had when you were younger? Is
yes,
that the type of
yes.
messaging you had?
Now, as I say, it was not sort of fully born in
Yeah,
my person until I was at university.
yeah.
So during my teenage years, I joined my local church,
Mm.
Narrabeen, and you know, we had a lot of fun. And what was interesting is a lot of those kids weren't from church families. We were all
Yeah.
just a little bit on the outer. And we had quite a lot of fun and quite a lot of dating and,
Mm. How
quite a lot
very un-Anglican of you.
breaking rules, but also, playing music and playing in Christian bands. And it was still, we were still very much part of the church, but
Yeah.
we weren't sort of so rabidly evangelical. We certainly didn't get into all of these distinctions between men and women or
Mm.
but it was when I went to university that I unwittingly joined the campus Bible study. And of course, anybody who knows about the University of New South Wales campus ministry, it was run by Philip Jensen
Yeah.
and it was incredibly rigid. And that's when my true commitment was tested.
Okay.
And we had the Billy Graham crusade in the 80s that I was a part of. Um, I did a lot of training in one-to-one evangelism. I was a Bible study leader. I was a cell group leader in my faculty.
Hmm.
Went to campus Bible study every week, sometimes twice a week.
Yeah.
I mean, I really was saturated at that time.
Mm. What impact did that saturation have on you and just the way that you felt about yourself and the world around you? What impact did it
Uh, well, there were some very notable and very bad times.
have?
I felt this kind of burden of evangelism so heavily.
Yeah.
And And so what it meant was my friendships with my fellow students were always sort of contaminated by this feeling, like you were an Amway salesperson,
Yeah.
that you were kind of involved in this pyramid selling all the time of
Mm.
trying to convert people. So
Yeah.
I lived on campus and I was pressured to run evangelistic dialogue meetings
Mm.
in my college. So everybody in the college I lived with then knew that was me.
Yeah.
So I was completely tainted with that. There was no hiding any of it.
Mm.
I also was going out with the boyfriend that I had from Narrabeen,
Hmm.
and things weren't going well. And, we got engaged, but you did that when you were 19.
Yeah. Particularly if you're 19 and in the church.
It doesn't matter if it's going well or not, you just get engaged.
Yes.
And we had some so-called couple counselling.
Right.
I won't say who, from somebody involved in this university church ministry. And
Mm.
it was so terrible and it was so condemnatory of me as a woman that I didn't know how to submit. I had
Yeah.
a dominant personality. Had I ever read that verse about the quiet and gentle spirit? It was a sort of about an hour barrage of my faults and shortcomings. And that affected me so badly that night. It was a very traumatic night, and as a lot of people know, when you have a traumatic event, you remember it very clearly.
Mm.
And I then spent weeks reading the Bible and pondering on the fruit of the Spirit, trying to change,
Mm.
this terrible person I was. I mean, the shame story was so dominant.
Yeah.
Um, as it turned out, we did break up, which was
Mm.
probably good for both of us. But I was carrying a lot of shame and a lot of guilt and a lot of sense of failure as a woman,
Yeah.
and, that I couldn't submit.
Mm.
So I think that affected me very badly.
Yeah.
One good thing was I was invited to do ministry training after I completed my degree.
Mm.
And unlike you, I didn't do a gospel gap year, or I I didn't join the ministry training scheme, and I just knew that it would be a disaster, even
Mm.
though that was quite subterranean, I think. I just knew, because women weren't paid to do ministry training, only men were paid,
Yeah.
because paying women was a waste of time because they just went and got married and had a
Hmm.
baby. And so why would you invest in them?
Yeah.
Um, and so they were talking about that I would raise my own funds in this ministry training. And I just thought, this is just going to be so horrible.
Yeah.
So I declined and went into social work, which was my degree. And it's one of those sort of sliding door moments where I
Yeah.
am so grateful to my wise mind buried deep inside me that I didn't do that, because
Yeah.
it sets you on a path to then go to more college,
Mm-hmm.
then be in full-time ministry,
Mm-hmm.
and you just don't have a career.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
um, but it did leave me with a kind of a nasty legacy, that experience. And then, of course, after I finished university, I still kept going to the university church. So I
Mm.
didn't leave. I was
Yeah.
there for years,
Yeah.
years and years.
It's interesting that you talk about, I guess, the pressure and the conditioning around that evangelical nature to just be out converting everybody. And I think
Yes,
a lot of people don't quite necessarily understand fully that that is not a choice, right? Like that is an expectation of you.
yes, yes.
One of the biggest stories that I talk about of my time in U13 was our mission trip to Fiji, and I literally drank pool water to be physically sick and ill because it was the only way I was going to get out of walk up
Not
evangelism.
Carver, that would have been better.
Yeah, I know. But it was like they literally was wanted to be in there seeing me vomiting in the bathroom
Oh
because it was the
my
only way
word.
I was getting out of walk up evangelism in a colored Christian nation as a white woman. I was like, that is not happening.
Well, there
Um,
was a part of you that knew that it was
yes.
gross and
Yeah.
offensive and terrible, and you didn't want to participate, but
Yeah.
perhaps you didn't have the language at that point to
Yeah.
say, fuck off,
Yes.
No,
Yeah.
you can't. And the trouble is that it's an expectation, and I certainly did sort of cold evangelism. We called
Yeah.
it cold evangelism or whatever, walk
Yeah.
up on the library lawn.
Mm,
We go up and say, hi.
mm,
Oh, it's just so appalling.
yeah.
Can I talk to you about Jesus, sort of thing? And
Oh.
it was so awful. And but it was the external pressure, but it was also the internal pressure, that I thought, if I've got the words of life,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a bad person for keeping them to myself. And there were
Yeah.
these hordes of unsaved all on the highway to hell, so it's my responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
I just wore that responsibility like a sort of a terrible, heavy
Mm,
garment, or
yeah.
like a stinking garment in the end that you couldn't shake off, because if you really did believe it, the
Yes.
only right thing to do was to talk to people about it all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. And what did it say about me if I didn't want to do that? Right? Like,
Well, what did it say about you that you were drinking pool
yeah,
water?
I know. It was desperation, Josie. It was desperation.
Well, it was nice, a nice piece of subversive kind of resistance, really.
Yeah.
It's all we
Yeah.
had available to get sick. And then perhaps it salved your conscience as well. Look, I'm sick. So I can't do it.
Yeah, it was the only way that like I could reconcile it, but I could also make it okay to my
Yeah.
leadership team as well. It
Yes.
was like
Yeah.
this dual thing. But what was it like for you? You know, you sort of said that that relationship and the horrible counseling session,
Yes.
and
Yes.
let's just get it very clear that not all pastoral counseling is not counseling. It's not the
No,
same
no, no.
thing.
And it wasn't counseling. It was just a
No.
shaming thing. It was just
Yes.
shaming. Yeah.
What impact did that have on you in terms of building and forming other relationships moving forward, even friendship?
Well, it was very hard. And
Yeah.
I was very nervous about, love relationships going forward. And, that I did have sort of a couple of boyfriends, but I was very nervous and I was always kind of putting the stops on sexual activity
Yeah.
because, that was increasing my shame.
Mm.
So they just felt constrained and, you know, um, burdensome and just didn't have the joy
Yeah.
that you should be having when you're 20 or 21 when you're dating
Yeah.
and feeling sexually free to just
Mhm.
experiment and
Yeah.
figure things out. So, and then when I was living on campus in college, I kind of fell for the most rigid, incredibly devoted, devout Christian there was in the college. Nice guy, don't know if he's listening, nice guy, but so devout. So I wanted to be as devout as him. And he used to do memory verses, Bible memory verses.
Yep.
He was part of Navigators. I don't know if you remember
Oh,
the Navigators.
no.
Well, I don't know if they still exist, but the Navigators were even more extreme than we were.
Okay.
So I then memorized verses. I've still got the little box sitting over there of all the memory verses that I remembered. I'd
Yeah.
have box after box of them. So I really tried to increase my devotion, my discipline.
Mm.
It was only perhaps years later when I was working and I met my now husband, which is
Mm.
a miracle that we're still together, that I sort of started to relax a bit, although I was terribly censorious with him and spoke to him that he had to be the head of the family and he had to be the head of
Yeah.
me. And, his kind of little face was, I don't know how to do any of this and why should we anyway?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it had a very negative impact
Yeah.
for many years, trying to work out the way that you can kind of relate in a healthy and respectful
Mm.
and sophisticated and emotionally kind of diverse and mature way with someone.
Yeah.
These rigid stereotypes of men and women was
Mm.
so constraining.
Yeah. Was that amplified because also singleness is not ideal? Like marriage is put on a pedestal, and
Yes,
unless, you have the quote unquote gift of singleness, you are expected as a woman to get married and have
that's
babies.
right. That's right. And then, certainly I've met in my counselling work lots of those women who didn't
Mm.
marry and who
Yeah.
in their 30s and 40s, no sex, no baby, no partner.
Yes.
And quite reasonably, there's a lot of bitterness about this
Yeah.
because, that's a cruel burden to put onto people. I
Yeah.
mean, no less cruel than, of course, the burden put onto queer people about how they express their sexuality.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so
Mm.
what's your question again?
Oh, that's okay. You kind of answered it anyway. Um, but I like asking this question because it sort of mirrors a question I usually ask later on, which
Yeah,
is during this period of time where everything was your faith was heavily saturated,
yeah.
who was God to you in your bedroom alone when you didn't have any expectations? Who was he to you?
Well, all the time I was trying to be obedient to the God of the Bible.
Yeah.
So always, I wouldn't let myself be kind of dominated or influenced by my feelings The God of the Bible was good and kind and just and merciful, but, vengeful. And
God.
so it was kind of this incredibly complicated and paradoxical and
Yeah.
toxic mix who the God was.
Yeah.
And so I used to try and pray with a formula,
Mm.
Thanksgiving, how
Mm-hmm.
did it go? I've forgotten now. There was a kind of a mnemonic,
There's an acronym.
an acronym.
Yeah, there used to be an acronym, and I can't remember it too. How nice
Yes,
is it when you forget
it
things?
is. It was Thanksgiving to start with, because then that just showed
Yeah.
your unworthiness. Look,
Mm-hmm.
I did this even in the privacy of my own mind.
Yeah.
And then we went to adoration. I don't know what it went, but
Yeah.
you only were allowed to do requests at
At
the
the
end,
end. Was it like tier or something?
something like
It was
that.
something like that. But yes, you couldn't ask anything until you got to the end.
And I remember I couldn't get pregnant. And of course, the big thing was to get pregnant,
Mm.
because if you couldn't get pregnant, who were you?
Yeah.
And so I remember praying desperately to God, but then, you know, not your will, but my will.
Mm.
And all of this, just thinking I'm never going to get pregnant. I was really desperate. And I
Yeah.
think back now, I was only 25.
Yeah.
It wasn't really that urgent. No, no. And then I said to myself, if I ever get pregnant, I'll have to call the baby Samuel, because it means heard of God.
Oh my
Remember?
gosh.
I haven't said this on any other podcast. Like Hannah praying in the temple and Eli hears her in the book of Samuel. So I thought I'll have to call the baby Samuel. So I have Sam now.
Oh my
I
goodness.
have him. I don't
Oh,
know if he even knows that to this day, but
well, he
there's
might now.
a very little chance he'll listen to this podcast, being the absolutely dyed-in-the-wool atheist that he is and always has been.
Oh, I love that. Oh,
Yeah.
it's so funny because there are those random little things like, naming children after someone in the Bible. And it's like, it's
Yes.
just
It's
insane.
it's all it's
Yeah.
all through your it's all
Yeah.
through your decision making.
Yeah.
And I think my husband was a new convert when I met him, and I think that was very good. A lot of people
Yeah.
said, "Oh, no, no, you can't date him. He's too new a convert."
Mm.
But he was kind of fresh and raw and a bit different, and I kind of liked it. And again, another subversive moment, like
Yeah.
drinking pool water. I dated him anyway,
Yep.
despite being told by my minister I shouldn't date him, and he didn't want me to date him and he wasn't right for me. Did it anyway.
Yeah. What do you think that was that allowed you to defy the person that you are supposed to divert that
That's
authority
right. I do think that there develops within you, perhaps, as I've sort of written about this in my first book,
to? Yeah.
about there is some other self that you have, that you cultivate, that
Yeah.
is subversive, that doesn't believe it. And I think I always really liked him. And
Mm.
like a lot of my friends who married men that were kind of chosen for them by the minister or by others because they were kind of godly or whatever they were,
Yeah.
they're not together anymore and they were miserable.
Yeah.
I liked him. And I think we had sexual chemistry. And
Mm.
of course, that was regarded as like
Yeah.
not right.
No.
So I stuck with it. And yeah, got married despite
Yeah.
being told don't do it by everybody.
Mm.
So there you are, a very wise subversive moment. And he also wasn't like my father. That was very
Yeah.
important to me, because I had a father with a very volatile
Mm.
temper and very uncertain and very unpredictable.
Yeah.
And that affected my childhood very adversely. And I thought, if I'm ever going to marry somebody, it's got to be somebody who your children are never, ever going to be scared of.
Yeah.
And he certainly is somebody they've never been scared of. I think
Yeah.
he's scared of them.
I want to ask a question on that, but I'm sure because if I was listening to this podcast, you said that you liked him, and I've got to ask, do you still like him?
I do still like him. And
See?
I do still like him. I like him a lot. And I think we've had sort of rocky patches. Well, who
Yeah.
hasn't? And
Yeah.
anybody who wants to know about it can read in the book because, it is a little bit honest, a little bit raw,
Yeah.
frank.
Yeah.
But one of the times that I was most concerned is when I really was deconstructing very strongly, and I thought he was much more devout than me.
Yeah.
And when we finally said, "Where do you stand?" we realized that we were both pretty much going in the same direction. And thank goodness for that. Thank the goddess that we did,
Yeah.
because it meant that we didn't have to deconstruct the marriage like lots of people do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and I know many people whose Christian marriages foundered on the rocks.
Yeah.
I mean, it was inevitable. Their reasons for getting married were spurious.
Yeah.
One deconstructs, one doesn't. It's incredibly challenging. I
Yeah.
do think I was just a
Yeah.
bit lucky, and a good subversive choice
Yeah.
back in
Yeah.
the day. Yeah.
I want to get to the part where you start questioning things, but I want to ask a
Yeah.
question because you brought up your dad. And
Yeah.
I'm curious because when I often talk about my own story, I will draw comparisons in that I was drawn to God as a father because my own father was shithouse, right? So I it's
That's a nice
a clinical
70s
term.
word. Shithouse. I haven't heard that since the 70s. It's very good. Yeah.
So I'm curious
Yeah.
whether that was something that you like is there a comparison there for you as well that you were drawn to, I would have back in the day would have referred to it as like the father heart of God.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And when you said before, in the privacy of my own room,
Mm,
who was I praying to? Well, it was this whole conglomerate of whoever God was said to be, but it was also overarching
mm,
this loving Heavenly Father who, no matter what, would love me,
yeah,
wouldn't be harsh with me because, of course, after all, I was born again.
yeah,
And I had a father who was unpredictable, harsh.
yeah,
I'm not going to use a stronger word as shithouse because there were good things.
yeah,
And I only published my book after he died, so I could be very frank.
yeah,
There were very good things and there were some good legacies from him. But just in terms of my own stability emotionally as a kid, that was very disrupted.
yeah,
And it means that I struggle, even now with lots of triggering around shouting, around people losing their temper, about atmospheres that don't feel right, where
mm,
somebody is going to get angry. I'm still struggle a lot with that. And that's just the legacy of an abusive household, really.
yeah. When did you start questioning things? And did you only ever stay in Anglicanism or did you
I
move?
was only ever Anglican
Oh,
because, Sam, the other ones were not quite,
well, they're wrong. They're not the right ones.
Well, the Uniting Church, we had a little saying that about what happened with it happened to other churches, like the Pentecostals, their faith is in the Spirit.
Yes.
The Catholics, their faith is in the Pope
Or in Mary,
or
yes.
in Mary.
Yes.
The Uniting Church is in reason,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah.
the Anglicans, we know where we're going. It's in the Bible.
Yeah.
We're the only ones that really base what we think on the Bible. So there was lots of, um, you know, covert and overt comments about other churches,
Yeah.
very negative about the Roman Catholic Church, almost always. That was always used as an example in church of kind of the worst possible example of being Christian, and in fact, probably not Christian.
Yeah.
The Pentecostals got a very raw deal too.
Yeah.
And I did go as a teen to a Pentecostal church a few times,
Mm.
and we did do the talking in tongues and everything, but I just knew that was all bunged on.
Yeah, I remember going to my first Pentecostal church and I was not in Anglicanism, I was in the Open Brethren church, but still Pentecostals are like
Mm,
just not a thing. And I remember going to my first Pentecostal church
mm,
with my
mm,
now wife
mm.
and they were doing like falling on the floor, like all of
Oh,
that sort
yeah.
of thing.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I turned to her and I was like, "What the fuck is this?"
Yeah, it
Like,
was really disconcerting, wasn't it?
yeah.
It
Yeah.
was really for those of us who've grown up in this very staid, and I went to churches that had kind of, the C of E
Yeah.
liturgy. So we'd had liturgy and prayers and the Apostles' Creed. It was quite formal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so no, I always stayed in the
Yeah.
Anglican church, but
Mm-hmm.
when did I start questioning? And of course, this is always so interesting
Mm.
because when I wrote my first book, I wrote down all the events that I could think of that were my kind of subversive moments, or I think I called them sites of injury,
Yeah.
where I actually had some dislocation with the church, with the teaching,
Mm.
with the congregation. And, they started very early. So,
Mm.
of course, the decision to marry my husband, but then that was rectified because, of course, once we were married, then that was that.
Yeah.
And then there were some very difficult moments with my elder sister, which I do write about in the book, because she was gay and I was very condemnatory of her and her choices.
Right.
And she at times called me a Bible wanking little Pharisee. Pretty fair.
Oh, goodness.
It's good, isn't it?
Yeah, it is actually.
Um, and was absolutely appalled that I would stick up for, the exclusion of women from ministry,
Yeah.
that I would actually sort of talk about marriages between a man and a woman, that I would talk in these incredibly homophobic and misogynistic ways. So I kind of knew what I was saying to her was horrific and damaging and disastrous to our relationship. But back then, I still thought, well, once she's converted, she'll get it.
Yeah.
Once she's converted, it's all going to be okay.
Mm.
So, all these moments, you can kind of string them together of the deep disquiet in relationships, decisions you make that are sort of not really part of the church. Another very important thing that happened is that I had two friends who got pregnant when they weren't married.
Ah.
And they both got the most unbelievably cruel pressure to give their babies up for adoption.
Yeah.
And neither of them did.
Mm.
And I think something kind of cracked in me that the church could do this to these women,
Mm.
that they could be so pressured to do something and they didn't want to do it. It would have been a forced adoption. And
Yeah.
I actually did work in my social work capacity
Yeah.
within adoption for many years. And I was so horrified that they would do this.
Mm.
So there was lots of these moments. And of course, they all start to
Mm.
concertina.
Yeah.
But, as I say, the final death knell wasn't until 2005. And I had some very significant moments, like one in about 1995 when I was at a conference
Mm.
and I was interviewed at this conference. It was a therapy conference, and very unexpectedly, I was being interviewed in front of a group. I just burst into tears about that being a woman and what a disaster it was to be a woman. And how could you be a woman in this life when all I wanted to do was to be a man because men can make choices? And this group was sort of sitting with some kind of horror that a therapist could be talking like this.
Yeah.
And that's when I also realized the church was affecting my whole sense of self in a very devastating, deleterious way.
Yeah.
And that's when I first said to my husband, we just have to leave this university church. We have to go to a church that honors women. It's going to kill me. So
Mm.
that was a big catalyst to leave the university church, to leave that very fundamentalist church, because I believe it was fundamentalist. And we did go to another Anglican church, but women did preach in this church. It was somewhat more progressive,
Yeah.
full of kinder people.
Yeah. Well, all of those moments of um dissonance, I guess, between what you had always been taught versus what you were suddenly feeling as to whether they were right or not.
Yeah.
Were you conscious of that at the time, or was that something that you reflected on later?
When you're conscious at the time of an extraordinary dissonance and
Yeah.
discomfort, I knew at the time, and was crying at this conference,
Yeah.
and then this is the days before mobile phones, so I rang up my husband from a public phone, a payphone,
Yeah.
and said something's got to change, something's got to shift.
Mm.
So I did know, but of course, words like deconstruction and all that
Yeah.
weren't even a part of anybody's language.
Yeah.
We use them a little bit therapeutically,
Yeah.
but certainly not in a spiritual or religious context.
Mm.
And that was in about 1995, and I didn't leave the church for another 10 years after that. So I went to this more progressive church for another 10 years, and I led women's Bible study and tried to do it differently.
Mm.
So I tried to have Bible studies on setting boundaries and tried to just be a little bit more expansive, even humanist. So I definitely was changing,
Mm.
but still thought I had to be a Christian and still wanted my children to go to Sunday school and youth group, still prayed that all the time.
Yeah. So what happened in 2005?
Oh, look, there was a kind of a conflict within the church, which I just won't go into all of that, but I think
Yeah.
it was just another sort of catalytic event
Yeah.
that allowed me to leave
Mm.
because I've been thinking about it for ages. We'd had some marriage problems. None of my kids were going to church anymore. They'd all given it up when they were about 12 or 13,
Yeah.
very, very summarily.
Yeah.
Um, so they gave it all up. And there we were persevering. My husband and I leading the worship and the singing, and I was so over it.
Mm.
So I think it was just general fatigue
Yeah.
and a realizing that it just didn't fit,
Mm.
and all the homophobia. And, my sister at this stage had been diagnosed with cancer, and I just kind of knew she could die.
Yeah.
And the whole thing about her going to hell became absolutely ridiculous
Mm.
because I thought, this is nonsense.
Yeah.
So I did what lots of people do. You just gradually stop your responsibilities.
Fade out.
Stop leading women's Bible study.
Yeah.
Stop doing the worship. Say you're wanting to have a break from the worship
Yeah.
and the singing. Say you're wanting to have a little break. Next thing, you're not going to church.
Yeah.
And then there's a few people who go, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm just having a little break." People don't persevere that hard with you. Just never went back. Never went back. And then I had a friend at another church who said, "Come with me for a while." But every time I went, I started crying. And I think people
Not
listening
ideal.
know that experience
Yeah.
because you can't sing the songs, you can't say the prayers. Everything is like ash and dirt in your mouth. It's
Yeah.
so horrible. And then, spoiler alert, my sister does die.
Yeah.
And, and then I start to reflect on my life absolutely, completely,
Yeah.
and never, ever, ever. I mean, except to go to weddings and funerals.
Yeah.
Have I been back in church?
Yeah. Same.
Yeah, yeah. Even then, I'm not even wrapped in the weddings and funerals. Having said that, I haven't been to any kind of overtly evangelical events where, like
Yeah.
at my own wedding, where there was a 45-minute sermon
Yeah.
to try and convert the kind of the trapped in the church.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a good thing. I
Yeah.
mean, honestly.
I mean, even my wife and I got married in a church. We still were like playing mental
Oh,
gymnastics at that point
I
and got
see.
married in a uniting church, and we had like
Right.
Be Thou My Vision at the
Yes,
service, and had a
yes.
full sermon, and we had someone pray over us, and it was just it's a whole spectacle. It
So
becomes
how long
an
ago was
evangelical.
that?
We got married in 2019.
Okay, well, you see,
Yeah.
you're pretty new out.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Yeah, I'm
um,
20 years.
yes. So, despite not necessarily having the language of deconstruction, what was
Sure.
that period of time like for you pulling apart the doctrine and do I believe this? Do I believe that? All of that sort of,
Oh, well, enormous relief.
yeah.
I mean, I do think it's complicated, but
Mm.
as I've discovered in my counselling and in my research, because I did a PhD on this, is that people's mental health improves.
Yeah.
So the idea that we were fed the idea that if I leave the church, my mental health will deteriorate, that people who go to church have the most robust mental health. They're the happiest people.
Yeah.
This was said to us. I mean, this is just bullshit.
Yeah.
So mental health improved. Then I had to deal with the grieving of my sister.
Yeah.
And then I started to really think, how is this affecting my counselling? Because I was still counselling a lot of Christians.
Mm.
And over the years, of course, I've been scrubbed well and truly off all the recommended lists for Christian counsellors.
Yeah.
The Moore College recommended counsellor list.
Oh,
Yeah, I was the go-to person. So
wow.
I was seeing lots of Christians and I was kind of feeling this sense that I was being inauthentic and people thought I was a Christian and yet I wasn't, but was it relevant to tell people? So there was that kind of period. And then I thought I need to make sense of this and I started researching it.
Yeah.
So I started researching it in 2010.
Right.
So that's when I thought I've got to make sense of what happened. And
Yeah.
so that's when I did my PhD into religious deconstruction
Yeah.
and how people reinvent themselves and rebuild themselves.
Mm.
And so that's why I did that. I mean, I was doing it for me as much as anything
Yeah.
else.
I'm thinking, like, what did you learn about
Yeah.
yourself throughout that research?
Well, of course, it was so incredible because I was seeing myself in the people I
Yeah.
interviewed. And then, of course, as people asked me about my story, that influenced their story. So I had to write all about this in the book,
Yeah.
about there was this sort of interactive, iterative process that my stories and their stories were affected by hearing each other, because that's what happens.
Yeah.
So and then I had to analyze everybody's stories, and that's when I came to understand that deconversion or disaffiliation follows all these different paths.
Mm.
But for a lot of people, for many years, you kind of live a double life
Yeah.
where you have something else going on that you dare not admit to, even to yourself,
Mm.
until eventually you're very relieved that it's all there. It's kind of all there, quite intact.
Yeah.
And I don't call it authentic self, because I see that as kind of as though what was happening before, was it not real? I think it's too atomized or essentialized to call it that. I've always called it a preferred self.
Okay.
I find the preferred self.
Yeah.
I found mine.
Yeah.
And, I think there is relief, but also there's all that grief of
Mm.
all your friends and all the networks. This is, ground well trod. Everybody knows this about the loss, that residual longing to
Mm.
be back, to be a part of stuff. Why aren't your friends wanting to be your friends anymore?
Mm-hmm.
And since I've written this most recent book, I have to say, I thought, because it's had a bit of publicity, I thought some of my old church friends might just drop me an email and say, oh, well, congratulations. They don't have to say they like it. Guess how many I've heard from? I've heard from people I went to school with.
Yeah.
I've heard from people from my old church fellowship at Narrabeen.
Mm-hmm.
They were pretty fun. I knew them when I was 15.
Yeah.
But how many from St. Matthias? Or, yeah, anyway.
Well, I mean, if they're anything like,
None.
yeah, I was
None.
going to say, if they're anything like mine, I suspect you heard from a big fat zero.
Big fat zero.
Yeah.
It's as
Yeah.
if I haven't been born. It's
Yeah.
as if I don't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. What was it like for you to explore and find that preferred sense of self?
Well, I loved actually doing the research because, of course, the parallel process with my own.
Yeah.
And that's why I've really enjoyed doing the counselling with people,
Mm.
doing the religious changes, deconstruction, people who are trying to figure things out.
Mm.
I mean, people can be at all ages and stages, and I'm just happy to hear those stories. And I kind of felt a new courage.
Yeah.
And all of that, the walk up evangelism, the having to be the right kind of woman, I
Yeah.
felt a new courage to just say, absolutely not.
Mm.
And there was one moment where I wrote a letter to the Sydney Morning Herald, which really outed myself
Mm.
about the homophobia of the Anglican Church. So I was absolutely outed myself. And I remember seeing it published and feeling my hands were shaking
Oh.
because I thought people are going to read that and go, oh, Josie, look at her. She's going to hell. I was very, very frightened.
Yeah.
And so I kept putting one foot in front of another with that courage to just keep expressing my own ethical frame, my own ethical substance,
Mm.
my whole new set of values.
Yeah.
And so, without sounding a bit sort of virtue signaling about it, I feel as though now I can speak on behalf of people who are too scared to speak.
Yeah.
Because, I'm older now. I'm, not a kid.
Mm.
And so I'll speak out because you're frightened.
Yeah.
I don't mind copying it anymore. But it's been incremental, Sam,
Yeah. Yeah. That kind of change doesn't happen overnight, right?
Sure doesn't. Well, it's happened over 20 years.
Yeah.
And so when people say to me, why am I so upset and they've left the church 2 years ago,
Yeah.
I kind of gently need to say it's very early days. And I
Yeah.
think some people have some story of I should be over it,
Mm-hmm.
which is a very disabling kind of story to be telling yourself when really you're never over it. It's a part of who you are now.
Yeah, I think like I have been out of my home church now for I think about 9 years, and there
Yeah,
are still days where I could easily burst into tears about the grief and the loss around that. And I think
that's right.
to put that unrealistic and really unfair expectation that you should just be over it,
Yes.
just not realistic, and it's not fair for yourself
No,
because it
it's
was
not
real.
fair at all.
Yeah.
I think there is a bit of a vulnerability in me now I think about it, and other people might relate to this, that because of all that rejection from the church,
Yeah.
maybe nice rejection, but also rejection, nasty rejection, and also that as if you've never been born stuff.
Yeah.
I think there is a vulnerability I feel in myself that when people ghost me or
Mm.
don't, um, friendships that go awry, I'm kind of pretty sensitive to that because
Yeah.
I've had so much loss. It really hurts when people who I think are okay aren't, the relationship isn't okay.
Yeah.
So I think that probably leaves you with a little bit of a vulnerability.
Yeah.
Mm.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
What has or how do you view spirituality now?
People always ask this question, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, this is why I asked the question of like, who was God to you? Because like I like to ask
Yeah, yeah.
how people's version of spirituality or whether they've thrown it in the bin altogether looks like.
Well, that very rigid view of God with the acronym of how you were supposed to pray. I still find myself in moments of trouble going, help me, God, and
Yeah.
I actually don't know what I believe in.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, is it habitual? Is it crying out to the universe?
Mm.
Um, I have kind of been quite not persuaded, but like my sister, I've got a little bit superstitious.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a great bird lover and bird watcher,
Yeah.
and she, like the ancient Egyptians, thought that birds came back as people came back as birds.
Oh.
People's souls are in birds. And
Mm.
after she died, I saw a lot of birds.
Oh.
And I and I do write about this, I actually had a bird speak to me and told me to
Mm,
write the book.
yeah.
So I wonder about that.
Yeah.
I wonder spiritually,
Mm,
are people around
yeah.
and they use birds or whatever to come back and tell us things? You
Mm,
see, so my spirituality is a little bit nebulous,
yeah.
but I've always kind of believed in, the numinous, the unknown.
Yeah.
I've always thought perhaps there's another world,
Mm,
but it's definitely not that kind of say Jesus is the Lord of your life
mm,
and you'll go to heaven and everybody else doesn't.
yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no. So maybe there's just extinction.
Yeah.
And maybe I just want to believe this about birds. But no, I don't know. I'm feeling I've become a bit psychic. Maybe I'm a bit like that.
Why not?
So there you are. That's me today.
Yeah.
But I know that in your in the other podcast, which you know about the boys who do I was a teenage fundamentalist,
Yes.
they speak about the comfort in not knowing and
Yes.
all of that. Don't know, don't know, don't know.
Yeah.
So I relate to that too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I talk a lot about the freedom that came when the words I don't know didn't instinctively instill fear and panic, and that the I don't know
Yes,
was okay all of a sudden.
yes.
Yeah.
And the fact that you don't have to give an answer for what you
Yes.
believe to old church people who want you to give an answer, like the old days, like,
Yeah.
apologetics, so they can argue with you. You
Yeah.
can just say, I don't know, and
Yeah.
I don't really want to talk about it.
Yeah.
You can say that as well.
Yes. Absolutely. I want to ask one question before I get to the my final question for every
Yes.
episode, which is, what would you say to little Josie as she is about to give her life to
Oh,
Jesus?
well, you can't, I don't want to say don't do it.
Yeah.
I don't want to say don't do it because good things happened.
Yeah.
You know, I met my husband. I wouldn't meet him otherwise.
Hmm.
Um, I, as my big Sam says to
Yeah.
me, it wasn't all bad, Mum. We did have
Mhm.
community.
Yeah.
They didn't get it as bad as me because
Mm.
obviously they left. So I
Yeah.
don't want to say don't do it, but I want to say don't sign up for campus Bible study. Like go along to youth fellowship, be in the Christian rock band.
Yeah.
Don't go so rigid. Don't go so far right.
Yeah.
Don't hang out with these people who want to tell you who to be and
Yeah.
how to act and who shame you.
Yeah.
If you can kind of hold on to some
Mm.
spiritual beliefs slightly, I
Yeah.
mean, maybe if I joined the liberal church, if I'd kind of been in
Yeah.
another church, I might still be in it. I don't know. So I don't
Yeah.
want to say don't do it, but I want to say don't go so far.
Mm.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
is what it is, isn't it?
And I think that that's important for some people to hear, though, because I'm not sure that I would tell my, 12, 13-year-old self
Yeah,
not to do it either, because I talk pretty openly about the fact that that decision literally saved my life at that
yeah,
point. And
yeah.
so I
Interesting.
don't want to change that. And, would there be parts? Absolutely. But I think it's important sometimes for people to hear that not everything has to be all good or all bad. We can move out of that binary thinking and
Absolutely.
embrace the middle, embrace the nuance, and take both. We don't have to
I
pick.
agree, and I
Yeah.
think it also helped me in my difficult
Yeah.
family. It helped me to find something that was mine, that wasn't
Yeah.
anybody else's. And I was very staunch, so conscientious, and that gave me quite a lot of solidity through
Hmm.
my adolescent years. I've got a part of me that really regrets that I didn't experiment with drugs and sex more, just
Yeah.
on the edge,
Yeah.
because um, we sort of managed to experiment a bit, but
Yeah.
not enough. And on the
Yeah.
other hand, I'm glad that I did
Yeah.
have the structure because it actually gave me some meaning to my life. And I did have a
Yeah.
lot of meaning,
Yeah.
shame. So, and anyway, it's where I'm up to now.
Mm. Yeah.
And look, there are regrets, though, of course,
Yeah.
Sam. I've got a lot of regrets. I've got regrets about some of the dreadful things I said to people about their sexuality.
Yeah.
I've got regrets about all those nights spent in one on one, two
Mm.
ways to live,
Oh God.
evangelistic Bible studies with people trying to convert them.
Yeah.
And I've got regrets about that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I've got regrets, but I
Yeah.
wouldn't say,
Mm.
don't
Mm.
do it. Don't have your come to Jesus moment. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that is one of the hardest things to navigate in deconstructing is to actually realize the part that you played in a harmful system. And I know, like, for
Yeah. Yeah.
myself, like, even as a queer person, I was so heavily, I would have described myself as like the obnoxious black and white Christian. And so
Oh,
even though
me
I was,
too.
yeah, I know, fun. Um, But like even as like a suppressed queer person, I would have sat there countless times with people helping them to suppress their own sexuality, and that is like one of the most painful things to
Yes.
sit on the other side with. And so, like you said, regrets, absolutely. But
Yes. I
we
was a
don't,
part of the group that was
yeah,
trying to convert people, like not quite, it was conversion therapy, gay conversion therapy, not quite electric shocks, but
yeah,
it was called Liberty, and we were
oh,
praying for, gay people to
yeah,
pray the gay away and all of
yeah,
that. I was very much a part of that.
yeah,
Yes. So regrets. I've had a
yeah,
few.
yeah.
Yes. But don't
But
you think it's interesting that those of us who were the most devout, the most black and white, and
yeah,
now the most ferocious in our deconversion,
that's who we are.
see, they shouldn't have put so much energy
Yeah.
into us because now we're using it against them.
Oh, goodness. Okay, I like to finish these episodes
Yeah,
with some encouragement for people, which is
right.
particularly for those who are very fresh in their deconstruction or they've potentially just been kicked out of their community,
Mm.
or something like that. What would you say to someone who is in those very early stages of deconstructing?
Well, as we've been saying, it's very important to appreciate the effects of shame and
Mm,
guilt upon you. Now,
yeah.
you might not be aware of it, but it will be acting upon you,
Mm,
those sort of stories of shame and guilt. And so, if there is any way, even that there can be cultivated, a very small, a very small part of you could cultivate some self compassion,
mm,
that might help you because there's going to be a lot of confusion and worry and fear. And if there can be self compassion, like, I'm doing the best I can, I'm
mm,
just going forward, I don't know,
yeah.
that just might mean that you won't be uh, too self horrified or self condemnatory.
Yeah.
And also to remember that these things take time.
Mm,
And, I'm talking about myself 20 years later.
yeah.
So I also think that it's important, if you can, start cultivating new and different types of friends. You probably have them already.
Yeah.
One of the big regrets that I have is because I left the church in my mid 40s. There was many, many years where I could have had friends that were subversive, politically left, different, and I didn't cultivate them
Yeah.
because they weren't Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And the Christian friends, they all dropped like flies and they didn't really care about me anyway, I don't think.
Yeah.
And what I've had to do, and I've been doing it steadily, is to cultivate new friendships.
Yeah.
So when I met somebody I really liked in a Spanish class, a really nice guy, I
Mm,
got to know him and
yeah.
his boyfriend
Mm,
and made a real effort to be together.
yeah.
So even if it was later in my life.
Mm,
And so now I'm lucky enough to have friends that aren't churchy or don't have a church history.
Yeah.
I also was lucky enough to have another married couple, my husband and I, another married couple who deconstructed the same time as us and left the same time as us.
Oh,
So we've been friends since that time.
yeah.
So we have a lot of memories together
Yeah.
about very bad times. So we've kind of moved together through this.
Mm.
That was a bit of a stroke of luck. But I do think to understand that you can't do this alone in community, whatever that means,
Yeah.
even if it's the old online communities. I mean, I never had any of those.
Mm.
All the Facebook and Instagram communities, they're all there.
Yeah.
And you can do that anonymously. Just listen to what people are saying. And then, of course, there's so many books.
Yes.
I read every single book about losing your faith that I could have. I've got them all. I must have 20 different books, all the different ways people have lost their faith.
Yeah.
So I read them all, and all of that helped me as well, because you could think, oh, yeah. And it just gave you a sense that it was going to be all right. There was lots of people like you.
Yeah.
And all that stuff that you're going to be the worst person in the world and you're going to go off the rails morally and you're going to have a miserable life and you're going to treat people really badly. You realize that's all a complete lie.
Yeah.
And there's lots of people out there living really good, proper, contributory, virtuous lives that are ex-Christian.
Yes.
So I think stay connected, find community. It doesn't really matter how, but that's been very helpful to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also one of the biggest pain points. So I think it's, we often talk about finding community again, finding that belonging, that,
It's
the
hard.
connection.
It's
The
so
connection.
hard.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
But once I kind of realized that my church connection failed
Yeah.
and was spurious, I don't know how significant it really was.
Yeah.
And that became easier. I'm
Yeah.
not saying that it was all terrible and that the whole thing was bad, but
Yeah.
they kind of interest in you once you drift off. You
Yeah,
withdraw
it feels
from them and they
transactional.
withdraw from you. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Now, speaking of books, I will have links in the show notes for people to be able to grab your books.
Thank you.
And so thank you for joining me, and thank you for being such a wonderful Australian voice, because for a very long time there was not a lot. And so
I know.
thank you for being one of the Australian trailblazing voices in this space and for coming on and sharing your story.
My absolute pleasure. And I hope it's been helpful to somebody listening. It was lovely talking to you. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Beyond the Surface. I hope you found today's conversation as insightful and inspiring as I did. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might benefit from these stories. Stay connected with us on social media for updates and more content. I love connecting with all of you. Remember, no matter where you are in your journey, you're not alone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep moving forward. Take care.